Right.
all in, okay?
Right.
And lo and behold, what was it, like 10 years, 12 years after we moved back to New York, guess what? The place that everyone had moved to, they were shutting down because operations are going towards Mumbai.
Mumbai. Jeez, man. I mean, how are you not furious enough to be loose with your language, much less your, I mean, it's wow, Mumbai.
They were.
That's outrageous.
They were.
That's
so
outrageous.
we moved from New York to Tampa, and then we moved back. But the people that stayed in Tampa, their jobs were relocated to Mumbai.
And I want you to think that people will leave like another job for this better pay, and then all of a sudden, they just pick up and move or shut down the factory and go to Mexico or Mumbai or India. And I just here going, I shouldn't have left the good job that I had. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you have these babies and this wife or husband and these babies. Oh man, don't get me started. How about this for New Year's resolution? Think clearly, because some of this stuff is ridiculous, and they always want to sweet talk you, but you got to think clearly. Some of these jobs is a date. You know what I mean? If that guy's like, no, this is my cousin's car, and he's got like what's those things? A screwdriver in the ignition. You might want to think clearly and get out of there. But geez, wow, Mumbai.
I don't know. I keep, every time I hear these reports about Sears and these type of stores, this is me being selfish, because we have a Sears locally here in Garden City, and first thing I look on a list to see if they closed the one in Garden City, and I'm like, oh, it made the cut, so it's one of the stores that's making money, and I'm like, okay, I'm fine, because can you only imagine? I mean, maybe some people can, but there's certain items that, Amazon is great, but there's certain items you need to actually go into a physical store and look at.
Thank you. Exactly. I tell people this all the time. It's like sometimes you want to test it and fiddle with the thing. You want to talk to the... but here's the thing. In the old days, you could talk and somebody knew about the department that they were in. Now everybody's like, oh, no, man, I can get you the manager. You're like... so going in can be just as infuriating. And sometimes I just go, now I know why these places are going out of business. You guys are, everybody wants to be employed. Nobody wants to do the job. You know what I mean? And it's not like, why don't I just get it from Amazon? My ex used to order shoes from Amazon, and she would get like 6 shoes in different sizes, like in different colors. And then she would try it on the upper side, the lower side, choose one that you like, and just strip the other ones back. And and I was like, is this? I mean, somebody got to put these back on the rack. Do these get? But that's the way they do it. And it's the only thing you're out if you can just order all this stuff to your house, 20 dresses to your house, keep the 5 you like, and send the other 15 back. And without the snotty attitude of a preteen or some guy who was like, I went to Nam. You're like, ugh. And now you're just kind of like, I wanted to walk in and ask a lot of questions about this thing, but these people are aggravating. So why would I do that? Now, I mean, it's a dark cycle. The cycle reminds me of the climate change cycle. I don't really know how you're going to make people care about a job that disrespects them, but I get that they disrespect you, but I don't want to be disrespected. Why? Because you feel disrespected. I'm spending money here. And that's me, who has a fair amount of empathy. Most people are just kind of like, if they're in there and you're the server, then you serve them, and you know what I mean? So I get it, but at the same time, the problem is these boardroom people who, if you felt good about walking into their shop, it would be a word of mouth thing. You know what I mean? And there's nothing better than word of mouth. But now it's all just kind of like commercials come in, because the commercials say we're good to the customers, and people just, I don't know, man. The environment has gotten so weird. I mean, the idea that you can't even walk into a place and have a nice small exchange with like the client, the customer service, right, the customer service person, and then have them know a little bit about stuff, like, what's the difference between, these Post-it notes and this Post-it? I do a lot of shopping at my local art place, and I'm like, what's up with this canvas versus these canvas, bleach versus not, these mole hairs versus, and nobody knows. I'm like, do you think that you get people who were painters and drawers and artists to work in your art shop? And they just got people who needed a gig, I guess. And it's just kind of like, all right. So now I look online for what I want and look for what the people say in the comments. And then I go and I handle my business myself. I know where to go. If they ask me, hey, do you need any help? I generally go no, unless it's somebody who looks like a manager, because then I want to mess with the manager, see if they know what they're talking about. But, I buy my art there, my markers, my pads, and then I just go out. But it's not because I had a really nice exchange with anybody anymore. Oh, I love this art place. Those people are all cool. I never say that about anybody. I just kind of go, oh, that art place is there, and it's the closest one. I'll go there. And at the end of the day, these giant conglomerates have kind of killed that off in America. It's the idea of the mom and pop shop. Everybody wants you to shop at their mom and pop shop so they can have 2 and 3 and then 6 and 12 and then sell it to Amazon. And good, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't think you get I'm not trying to help you. Man, I don't know. Don't even get me started. The idea of it has gotten ridiculous, and why it is this way was coming down the pike for a long time.
Oh no, I agree with you, and I think I said to you and a bunch of our friends in the chat room that I think it was leading up to Thanksgiving. I walked into JCPenney. It was empty. Couldn't find a rep that wasn't located at a register. So,
right, exactly.
If you needed something on the floor, you were kind of SOL. But if you wanted to for something, you can go to a register. The person was there.
Right.
And
exactly.
I tell you, there have been times when I've run into that before with traveling to Sears, like picking up an item at Sears, and I'm standing around there like 20, 30 minutes. I've already gone to the kiosk. I've punched in my code that I was given that the product would be there, and it was like, who did it and ran? And then, just like you said, you wonder, and not to be negative, because we know people have jobs and people need jobs.
Yeah, and it's hard, and there's, I'm so the service
and the economy is hard out here, and,
exactly.
Everyone doesn't have a master's degree, and we get it. We understand.
Right, exactly. But like I always tell them, hey, man, I was there once. I remember being 16 and 17 with these busted jobs. I get it. But at the same time, I knew enough about what I was doing to let you know where this or that was. And if I didn't know it, who in the store did know it versus, what this phone-in work that you're getting now.
Right. And I just remember walking around, almost going into the back of the stockroom myself. Because I'm standing there, I'm ringing the bell, and I'm like, okay, there's no one here. There's no one around here. And they're like, oh, you got to go upstairs to such and such area. And I go upstairs, and they've closed like 5 minutes earlier.
Right.
But, that's when you start to sit there.
You know what I mean? And that's essentially what it is. You have to be able to keep this system up and running because it's your bread and butter. You know what I mean? So you go into these stores, there's no one on the floor. Shame on Sears for having no one on the floor. So every day you tell me you care less and less about the people coming in to shop or buy whatever. You have no professional, anybody in that place other than the automotive department where you have to know this stuff. But the idea that you don't have somebody who knows the difference between this TV and that TV is ridiculous when people naturally know this because they're curious. So why don't you hire the guy who knows this, right? Like if I worked for Sears, you could easily put me in the TV section, if you had a comic book section or a novel section, you could put me there. But I would struggle in your automobile department. The idea that you don't even ask what you're good at, where we can best utilize you, is ridiculous. And then you go to the checkout, and they'll have 20 registers, and there'll only be 3 people on any of the registers, and there'll be a line, and that'll be a line if the place is crowded or not. I've been sitting here going, why is there a line? This place is empty, and it's people are just not serious about it anymore. And so yeah, it's when people get not serious and they're at work, they just tend to make everyone around them crazy. Whether you're coming in to buy something or you have to work with them or they're a boss, everybody's phoning it in.
Well, right? I think some people are phoning it in from the workers' perspective, but also on the analytics side, because you got to think about it. These people are doing some type of forecasting. So they're saying, hey, based on last year's numbers, we only need to have 1.5 person.
But you know what forecasting gets you? Forecasting gets you Donald Trump as president. These people rarely know what the hell they're talking about. Excuse my language. But I once had a girlfriend who had a PhD in economics, and we were talking about, and mind you, I ain't got no education, and we were talking about the presidential elections, and she said, and I will remember this forever because I thought she was fairly astute, and she said, George Bush will never be president. And I was like, huh. And he became president not just once but twice, right? And I remember hearing it again when they were like, Donald Trump will never be president, and Barack Obama said it. And the first thing that happened was a shiver ran right down my spine. I was just kind of like, it was almost like deja vu. So, I mean, stop underestimating things that you yourself would either get into or not put up with, right? And it's like, if you're gonna be a party person, when someone goes, oh, this guy's outrageous. He's hanging out with all these girls and he's drinking and running for president. He's cheating on his wife. How dare he? You as a party person have to be able to have some insight into that and be like, I don't think a lot of people are gonna have a problem with that, because a lot of guys who aren't doing that want to do that, and a lot of guys, you know what I mean? And it's this kind of thing. You have to look at it with the eye of someone who's, I don't want to say a pragmatist, but someone who isn't a BS artist, if I can say that. And I think that everybody wants to be right. It's like the Me Too movement, where believe all women. You're like, that's ridiculous. There are women in jail. You know what I mean? Who are guilty of stuff. Your believe all women implies women don't do bad things. They don't lie. They don't cheat. They don't steal. How about we get to the bottom of it and punish the bad actors? How's that? Versus every woman is instantly right. And this is where you're going. People are agreeing with stuff that they know full well that they don't really agree with. In order to look popular but in order to not make any waves in this society where everybody seems to say the same thing to be popular. If you don't want to be popular, I mean, you'll know where I'm coming from. But if you raise people to get along and be, I don't want to say neighborly. That's the wrong word, because I think you should be neighborly. But just to fit in is a problem, and I think you're getting a lot of this fit in noise. I wish, I think I said this before. I think the problem with just gonna hit the Me Too movement one more time. The problem with the Me Too movement is there aren't enough women who will challenge other women. When men do it, we sound like, oh yeah, well now you're supporting bad behavior. Like what? No, I'm just saying, But if you have, a wider degree of ladies, some who are 50 and 60 and some who are 20 and 30, and they cover all gamuts, black, white, women, when some woman runs up and goes, oh, X, Y, or Z, instead of guys going, this doesn't sound right, the women can go, that doesn't sound right, because some of these stories sound fishy. So yeah, I don't know how did I get on Me Too?
I'm not sure how we got on Me Too, but I want to give a big shout out to a sponsor of Late Night Parents, the Welt Smart Belt, WELT Smart Belt. It assists in a healthy lifestyle by tracking the waist size, steps, sitting time, and overeating frequencies. Connect with the Welt app via the Bluetooth and make your belt smart. That, once again, is the Welt Smart Belt. I want to thank you guys for sending me a model. I've tested it out for the past 30 days, and it's and also interviewed, which we'll probably release tonight, Dr. Sean Kang. Did an interview with him while he was in Korea. The beauty of Skype, Sean, I will tell you.
Nice.
Here it was like a Thursday night, but it was a Friday morning. It was Thursday maybe at 8, and it was Friday at 8 in the morning, and we were able to connect and talk about his product and everything else like that. But that's the beauty of what we do on Late Night Parents. Do want to give a big shout-out to WRWK in, I'm going to say Richmond. It's Midlothian Turnpike, Virginia. That's 93.9. It's called The Work, WRWK. Thank you for downloading the podcast.
I think that's Midlothian.
Say it again?
Midlothian.
Midlothian.
Yeah, Turnpike.
Oh, okay. That's not too far from you. Well, I mean, it's closer to you than it is to me, right?
Yes.
But I do know they've downloaded the podcast and they played it on a couple of occasions, so we do appreciate it.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk to you about this next item, which is not per se about the president, but I want to talk about the government shutdown. The byproducts of this government shutdown, Congress going left and right. I mean, whoever you want to blame the president, you want to blame GOP, you want to blame the Democrats. I want to just talk about getting to the core, because all these other people really don't matter.
Right.
I think, Sean, what matters most is the mom that's depending on child support from the federal worker whose pay is frozen.
Right.
The federal worker who can't make the mortgage payments.
Right. Okay, here's the thing.
Okay.
These people suck. All right.
Wait, I need you to stop. When you say these people, who are these people?
Congress.
Okay, go ahead.
They call it Congress because someone's always getting screwed. So the thing about Congress is, if you're going to do this, then you need to build in something for those people who have to pay everyday bills, who have to pay their mortgage and their rent, who have to send out checks to schools for the kids' tuitions. And instead, you leave them holding the bag while you collect a check. I mean, it's the height of arrogance. Talk about Congress leaving people behind. You know what I mean? But then they'll make a certain exemption for the military, for the guys with guns. The guys with guns are getting paid. But wait a minute. No one should be doing free work in America as a great-grandchild of slaves, right? No one should be doing free work in America. So it amazes me that they didn't write something in any of this that these people either keep getting a check, or if they didn't get a check, the people that they owe would have to take it on the chin, which is kicking the can down the road. But at least, it's looking after these men and women in these offices and cubicles and these garden guys who cut these lawns and these grasses and these what are those that everybody always wants to go? The national parks that they always want you to go to, but now nobody can go to any of the national parks because they're all closed or government shut down. It's just, I just wish I could get a get out of jail free card so I could just slap one of them upside the head and ask them what the hell are they thinking. You know, because they go in saying that they're for you and me, us working dudes, right, us mom and pops, and then they get there and they never look back. It's like, you know, as soon as you go, hey, the air is bad or something, all of a sudden you're a snowflake or a hippie or a liberal or some other thing that they can just smack you down with to put you in this box. But at the end of the day, shut down or no, people have to pay their bills. And you put people in a bad position. So what is it? What's that stat? Something like 60% of people don't have 2 months worth of savings in the country. That's got to be some government workers.
I think I said to you that 68% of people and we're talking strictly Americans in the United States have less than $500 in their savings account.
See, that is just, I mean, that's outrageous that you would do that to these people. Like, everybody is a 19-year-old frat boy who lives in his parents' basement. You know, everybody is not, what's the word I'm looking? Everyone who works for the government is not flush with cash, right?
No, they're not.
You can't do this to people. And they do it to people all the time. With
you have people living check to check, regardless who they are.
Yeah.
Because people
exactly
tend to live above their means.
Exactly.
And we're not saying that you should penalize them for living above their means, but
right. I mean, this is America.
Right.
You can save if you want. You can spend if you want. Exactly. As long as you don't steal. So that whole living above your means has nothing to do with the argument. You know what I'm saying? It's like, if you can pay your bills when your bills are due, then you're a good American. And if these guys only have $240 in them, but they've got this excellent balancing act going, you kick them off their high wire with your shenanigans. So you're essentially throwing stuff at their circus act because, you should have more than $500 in your savings account. But you know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, this is not their bad. They're not running up against financial turmoil because they did something. They don't owe a bookie. You know, they didn't spend the money at a casino. You know, you screwed them over with this. Nobody gets a check, but you have to come in and do the work nonsense. That's outrageous. The first people who should lose this money is Congress. You know what I mean? The first people who should pause everything, health care, salary, private drivers, all that, take the bus like the rest of us, is Congress. It's outrageous that this is, and I don't really blame Donald Trump for this shutdown either. I don't. I look at this like the Democrats could not wait to this was their trump card. They weren't trying to work with him, and they needed him to own this, right? So they went out giddy. At the end of the day, I don't like either one of these groups, and I refuse to keep choosing that which one is the better. At this point, you're murdering off like American family to be a globalist, right? So we can have all these great international relationships, but they're costing American workers, American mom and dads, and American kids. Kids are not as smart as they were when we went to high school. I don't care what they tell you. They're not. And I don't think we were as smart as my dad. My dad knows a ton of stuff that he had to know. And somewhere along the line, they didn't do it all at once. They sort of like let the standard slip and let the standard slip and let the standard slip. And now you look at the kids today, 25 and 30-year-olds who had a high school education. We're not saying let's just talk high school because college, everybody doesn't get a college education. They cut back some of the stuff that they taught, right? And then I think that from the time I was a kid, and they did the same thing to my generation. You're always getting less in America, corporate America, you might as well call it. It's not right. Pay these people. They're doing the work. It's not like, and some of these people are being furloughed. So now you sit at home and I get a check?
Well, I think it comes down to essential versus non-essential.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you know what's essential? Eating and heat, which we all need.
Right.
So,
right.
What are you telling me? we're gonna put your heating and your eating on hiatus? Shame on these people. And the reason why, I don't run for president, or you don't run or someone else who thinks common sense like this doesn't run for president is because it's $1 billion to run for president. So they didn't tell you can't run for president, but they put it so far out of reach that you can't run for president. So who's your next hope? The porn stripper, not scientist, attorney? Is he it? What's her name? Dancy Daniels, or whatever her name is, Smiley Daniels, her lawyer. Is Stormy Daniels. Is her lawyer going to do it?
Michael Avenatti is that
right?
Attorney.
It becomes this thing where you have to always. It's a casino now where you bet on who you want to sort of represent you, and it sort of looks like a Disney movie where all the knights in shining armor are trying to fight the dragon, and they're just getting decimated. But behind the dragon is, I guess, the girl you have to wake up with a kiss or something. This is what's going on. When that's a European dynamic. What should happen with the American dynamic is all the civilians in these villages to tell these Prince Charmings that we don't need them and rush the thing ourselves, and by that rush it ourselves. By that I mean somebody that you like, your baker, your butcher, your dog catcher, who you like, who you think is smart, should get a grassroots movement to run for some office. And that happens in no offices because all of them are owned wholeheartedly. And I don't know who owns them outright, but I'm pretty sure the American citizens don't. So, yeah, the idea that they're all for a shutdown tells me that they are all disconnected from us average men and women who have kids to feed and car notes to pay. You said the American dream was a house and a car and all this stuff, and then you make it impossible to maintain that. And right, so now that's the people who have it. Now it's impossible to get if you're about 30. So yeah, I don't know. I could rage about this government forever. I try not to.
No, it's just, like I said, we can sit here and we can scream, get off our grass, get off our lawn, and we can say,
hey, whippersnappers.
But, you kind of, I don't know, so at work, I work with a bunch of millennials.
Right.
And the way they view things and the way we view things are two totally different. You could take the same scenario, and the way we're going to attack that scenario or whatever the issue is, we're going to address it. It's going to be much different than the way they see it and the way they will address it.
Right, which is fair. Generational differences have always been around, right? And that's just fair. But I read this article. I forgot the name of the article, but it's this idea that the people who raise the millennials essentially Frankenstein them. Exactly. Everybody's a delicate flower. Everybody gets a trophy. You're all important, and you're the most important one, honey. And you raise them and now they all have this sense of entitlement, but they all want stuff. But the world is not going to humor that. So now I think they're adjusting fine from what I see, but they're not in power, and they won't be in power for about 35 years. I think we had this conversation the last time I was on your show about our generation finally coming in, which is about once you hit about 50. So, yeah, some people will be ahead of the curve and get elected like Obama. Well, how old was Obama when he got elected? He was about 52. But generally, people who get elected to president are like 65 and 70. So he was ahead of the curve by a lot. But from here on out, our presidents are likely going to be the 60s generation who were all right with marijuana, right? They were all right with drinking and cohabitating. They were all right. And now you're seeing some of that social justice reform, which you didn't get from the people in the 50s who grew up thinking that, who were maybe 30 in the 50s, who were sort of set in their ways and thought that the people of the 60s, who by the time they were 40s were whorish hippies, right? And the 70s were drug addicts and Black, so you get a different tone of people because they grow up in a different environment. Like, have you noticed that everything on television is Black music with white faces? Have you noticed this? Right? So in the 70s, it was all rock music, right? In the 80s, it was rock and almost no hip-hop, but hip-hop was all over the radio. So now in the 2000s, and it wasn't even this big in the 2000s, but now there's hip-hop grooves, hip-hop beats selling you cars, they're in interludes in movies and commercials. They're all over the place. And a lot less of this orchestral, like Star Trek, kind of like big 40-piece ensemble stuff happening when they use that for movies, essentially, for emotional context. But when they want a feeling or a flow, it's always Black music. And it doesn't matter if it's 5 years ago or it's, Ray Charles from like the 60s and the 70s and 50s. And that tells you that one of the first rips on like the culture was the music, devil music, blah, 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 blah. And now people are like, they grew up with the music. The music is not an issue. So going back to what I said, people who grew up in like with the 60s, and it's 50 years since I read since Woodstock. So those people are now coming into power. They're lawyers and they're going, yeah, why are people being sent to jail for weed? Much less sent to jail for 10 years for weed. That's ridiculous. So I fully expect in 10 years social justice reform. But here's the problem with social justice reform. What you need is legal reform, because the way this society marginalizes you and steals from you outright is with the lawyers, right? So when you go, this is not right, I need a lawyer, and you have to talk to a judge who's a lawyer, who's a gatekeeper for justice. So cops don't get punished for bad behavior, and I've got in my head this guy who raped a woman in uniform, and it was like, oh no, she came on to me, so I was like, what? So and the judge was like, mulligan, and you keep these people around. I think as this goes on in 10 years, you're not going to be able to get away with this. Well, the problem with the Me Too movement is it's heavy-handed. It's not going anywhere because they have an absolute righteous and correct point. And those people who grew up, and I think some of this Me Too movement is trying to get a hold of the movement to direct it at people, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that, considering a lot of the 60s, 70s era people who are coming up, there was also a sense of social justice, right? Not just getting control of something. So maybe the hope and the dream of the quote-unquote perfect America, where you hit 18, you go out there into the workforce, you get that sucky job, which gives you a better job, and then you're in the rat race with the rest of us. Start your business, start your family, whatever that may be. It'll be easier because these people won't be allowed to rob you blind. And I think the people who are around now, these 60s, not so much 60s, but like these 70s and 80-year-old people who have it now, come from a generation where their parents were the poorest of the poor from the Great Depression, right? So their parents told them about the Great Depression and war, and then they were born in, I want to say, 1930-something. So they were 20s when the 50s came around, and car hops and socks, and their biggest thing was like a hot rod. But they also had all those social white makes right kind of women stay in the kitchen kind of no foreigners kind of rules, but they love the money. So now you see them in charge, and what do you get? You get all the people who love money making laws when nobody pays taxes, and everybody wants to show you how, how many people from their family they can shove in a job, and their day is coming to an end. The problem with America is none of these people are ever called to carpet for what they did, right? Nixon, he ended with a giant motorcade funeral, despite that he was a bad guy, right? Who's the other guy? The cross-dresser from the FBI. What's his name? Anyway, the FBI building is Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover. The FBI building is named after him, and we all acknowledge that he was a bad dude. So when you begin to take these statues of like traitors down in the South and you change the name of that building, you'll begin to see a shift in America. But you're going to have to wonder if it's going to still be around, because we've got what I think, this is just my opinion, we have foreigners in our apparatus, and I don't think anybody cares to do anything about it. But yeah, I think the shift is on, and I think the next 15 to 20 years will tell the tale. Because if we can't survive the next 15 to 20 years, we're not going to survive. Because once the people who everybody gets a pony people show up, it's the nation is dead. They're either going to have to fix their crap by the time they get there, or the nation is going to be a wrap. Because everybody can't be right. Some people have to be wrong, and everybody who's wrong isn't a villain. It's just a simple difference of opinion. But yeah, I think America's got a long way by sowing division amongst its citizens, so the people at the top can be at the top. And I think people who are plucked, like that you get that. What's happened to my memory? You get the Willy Wonka card at the ice cream bar, and you win your election. I think the first thing they do is they shake your hand and say, "Congratulations on your election. This is how it works." And then you sort of turn your back on the people who got you there. But at the end of the day, I think the American people, I tell my nephew this all the time, there's too much information coming at you for them to hide stuff. So it's not like they can say, and like they did 100 years ago, that, black people had tails and, we were dangerous and all that. No one believes that. We have smaller brains. No one believes that anymore. There's too many facts out. The idea that, if you have a woman president, she'll be emotional and start no one believes that nonsense. It's ridiculous. So once you cast away, and people will try and still use that, but more and more people aren't buying into it. And it pegs you more as a loser and a dangerous character in the public politics than it paints, somebody who may run for office who, had to strip to get to A to B to feed the kids, and now all of a sudden, she's turned it all around. So they'll go, oh, she did this. That won't matter, because people have come up and changed in ways that I think the majority of us will be like, oh, wait, what? She didn't steal anything? Because I'm being stolen from right now, like this government shutdown. And they'll be more willing to give those people shots than perpetual lawyers, perpetual sons of rich people.
Monroe, KLQS-LP Agua Dulce, KPDO Pescadero, Sunflower State Radio Extra Marysville, WLRI-LP Gap, WMUU-LP Madison, WRAQ-LP Angelica, WXDR-LP New Orleans, WXIR-LP Rochester.
In other news.
To determine why and how the towers collapsed. kind of scary to have this helicopter hovering around.
You walk up to them and confront them. They can't stand that.
Can you hear me okay?
Welcome to Another News. I'm Jeff Brady. On this show, the topics of healthy boundaries, high character, and the human shadow have been examined in depth with guests such as Dr. Paul Dobransky, Paul Levy, Dr. Connie Zweig, and Dr. Joe Slate. I'm going to connect these ideas and show you how the healthy mind-body-spirit concept applies directly when assessing the health of a person's boundary and human energy field. Beginning with boundaries, past guest author and psychiatrist Dr. Paul Dobransky is one of very few who developed a comprehensive visual system to understand and utilize a healthy human boundary and explain that connection to achieving high character. He says your identity in life depends upon learning about boundaries. By doing so, you can learn how to be free from stress and how to command respect. Essentially, making decisions out of courage, meaning doing the right thing at the time that it's needed, is making a decision out of courage. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to be hypervigilant and run around performing acts of heroism. Being mindful and keeping your word, such as showing up at the right time or being prepared for a meeting, are some everyday examples. Standing up for yourself in an assertive way and learning how to say no are other examples. In our interviews, Dr. Paul explained the importance of saying no to maintain healthy human boundaries and keep the energy exchange in the win-win category. Taking win-lose deals will over time empty your tank of self-esteem. Stop taking the win-lose deals by answering no to those requests. Saying no is closing the visualized door in your boundary wall. As Dr. Paul describes it, your boundary wall has a door, or many doors, but it's important to visualize the handle attached on the inside of the door so you control the opening and closing. When you have the control of the door and only accept win-win deals, in addition to making decisions out of courage, you build your self-esteem. Your self-esteem is a combination of well-being and confidence. That's your gold, which Dr. Carl Jung refers to when speaking about the psychological condition of the human shadow. How can you be free from stress utilizing a healthy boundary? Many who are aware of their shadow issues and potential to lose composure under stress have developed a system of pausing before responding to stimuli. This is a similar teaching covered in some martial arts, military, and police training. Keeping your composure in a high-stress environment is usually a sign of high character. A person with a healthy boundary can choose to respond or not, since the handle of the boundary doors are on the inside. It's a simple yet effective visual tool that can help fortify your self-esteem and reduce stress. Unhealthy boundaries can be full of holes or can be walled off. A walled-off boundary seals up the doors to protect from stimuli such as stress, people, or a hostile environment. The impervious boundary is often deployed by those emotionally or psychologically hurt, or if someone has experienced loss. In these cases, stress can crash through and overwhelm the person. This is often why psychiatrists will prescribe antidepressants as a temporary fix, while you learn to build a proper boundary. In a walled-off boundary, no decisions were being made. Therefore, self-esteem levels remained very low. Low self-esteem can result in projecting that loss or hurt onto others. This is also where the shadow manifests, creating irrational or unprovoked negative thoughts, lashing out, name-calling, and violent acts toward others. We hear part of an interview with Dr. Paul Dobransky speaking about boundaries and psychic vampires.
Well, some of the ways, other ways of thinking about boundaries are that it operates as a shield. If you thought of medieval times, how somebody could get into a fight, he'd have a sword and a shield. And if you use your sword, that burns all your energy up. But if you just put up a shield, you block other people's attacks. So our boundary is a shield against stress. And stress is just negative emotional energy. It's simultaneously, though, like a tank, like a tank of our fuel. And one of the ways of thinking of our emotional fuel is that's self-esteem. There are two varieties of self-esteem that I talk about. So it's both a shield and a tank. It's a container.
I'm glad you brought up the defending yourself part, because on the show we often talk about energy vampires and things like that. And we tried to understand what's going on psychologically with past guest Dr. Joe Slate and others, even Matthew DeLuz. What's going on with people who you're near, they would drain your energy and things like that. Is there a scientific explanation for this?
Sure. In fact, I had a mentor in psychiatry in medical school, kind of turned me on to doing psychiatry as a specialty, and he was an anthropologic psychiatrist. I thought it was one of the most unusual things I had ever heard of, that he spent a lot of his life's work studying vampire and zombie myths in world cultures. And at first glance, that sounds kind of like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter or something, very out there. But it's legitimate science, a legitimate academic endeavor for him. What he determined is that vampire and zombie myths exist in all world cultures, even if they have no connection to other cultures throughout all history, because they evolve as a way of teaching a society about what pathologic narcissism is. And that's really what vampires mean symbolically, pathologic narcissism.
You're really you're taking the fun out of the vampire mythology. But I kind of understand what you're saying. It's a condition where just something's not right. And you had pointed out earlier that it's a young person in an adult's body.
Let's make it fun and scary again then. It's very, very real. I mean, if you talk to people in the process of divorcing, that's very real and very scary and very painful. And blood is symbolic of a kind of life energy. It's life force. So this concept of a vampire, an emotional vampire, or a pathologic narcissist, to psychiatrists, that's how we talk about this. It's somebody who drains your emotional energy, which is very real, very scary. You're exhausted being around this kind of person. They literally do drain you, even though it's invisible and it's not blood. It is your life force. It's your energy. It's your self-esteem. Your self-esteem is being sucked away for real by a person. So it's even scarier than a horror movie. It's real.
Right, where you could at least see the blood and try to stop the bleeding. You can't even see it.
Right.
But if you know your work and you understand the boundaries maybe in your material, you could feel it happening. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very subjective thing. If you don't notice what's happening and one day you get a wake-up call, you're in a relationship that you didn't even realize that you've lost your sense of self. It's become codependent. Or you're in a toxic workplace where the boss is a bully and you came in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on your first day of work, and then a year later you're this sullen, depressing person. You're like, oh my God, what happened to me? Well, you've been a victim of a pathologic narcissist.
That's fascinating.
An emotional vampire.
That's amazing.
Bullying.
It's bullying.
Bullying is a big, big topic, and it's not new. It's been around forever, and it's kind of what pathologic narcissists do. Vampires. They're bullies.
The opposite of that, when you're around somebody who makes you feel good, what's going on there in terms of the boundary dynamic?
Well, being around, it's almost like a definition of friendship. My second book for women was about women's friendships with each other. And as I was trying to lay out, my personal definition based in science of what that would look like, it has 4 variables. And then simultaneously, I was looking for, are there any ancient philosophers that talked about friendship? And I actually could only find one, Aristotle. I forget what exactly his terms were, but they were so similar. Friendship is consistent, mutual, shared positive emotion. Consistent, meaning what you see is what you get. It's always going to be that way. Most of the time, it's going to be that way. Person keeps their word. They say they're going to show up to help you move. They show up to help you move. It's mutual, meaning it's a two-way street. It's win-win. It's not always you leaning on them and them always leaning on you. It's both of you doing that 50-50. It's shared, meaning if your friend that you just met moves across country, well, what are you going to do together? You have to do things together for a friendship to exist. And then the most important terminology of all is positive emotion. You can't have a friendship based just on complaining or negativity and this sort of thing. It'll dissolve eventually. So that's one example of, being around a positive person who is your equal, your peer. We call that a friend. And what we share with each other is love or friendship. They're the same thing. It's shared positive emotion.
You go into detail about the currencies of the 4 currencies and how those are important in the exchange in a relationship or a friendship or an intimate or business or things like that.
Sure.
Those types of relationships. But if that's not there, you get static. Or if you're in a intimate relationship and the boundaries have dissolved and you're sharing all these things and there's a breakup, what happens there?
Well, the natural course of, say, a codependent relationship where one or both people are kind of narcissistic.
Codependent, right? That's what it's called.
Codependence, what the natural course is, there's mutual bullying, so to speak, that's going on. The boundary between the two people breaks down, and it can create an illusion that feels, at first, really, really good. And we call that intimacy. I mean, when we know somebody intimately, it means we have full access to everything they are, how they feel. We have shared feelings, shared ideas. We feel bonded to each other, and it feels great. But if a couple or 2 friends or business partners, whoever it is, can't sometimes put up a boundary again and close the door on each other on areas they disagree with each other on, agree to disagree,
right,
then eventually one or the other person in this permanent intimacy starts kind of bullying the other, and then the best one wins. They start acquiring all the resources in the relationship. It becomes all about them, always benefiting them, and not the other person, until finally the one that acquires all the resources, the relationship, says, oh, wow, I feel full. Thank you. See you later. We're going to part ways. And then there's a winner and a loser. And somebody goes off with less than what they had before.
And the material in that boundary, that's more than just self-esteem.
Yeah, it's self-esteem. It's your time. It may be your money. It's your energy, your passion, your spirit, your humor, your information, your education, all these parts to you. There's an invisible economy. You were talking about, what are the currencies of this silent interpersonal economy that goes on between people. Well, both lawyers and judges will describe what they call a person legally. A person is an entity with cognitive, emotional, and volitional capacity. And all that means is somebody has intellectual ability.
I wonder where you got that. It's time-tested and in court. And these are the currencies of and dynamics of being in a relationship. Was love in this as well?
Yeah, love is a synonym for happiness or self-esteem. They're all positive emotional energy. Love, friendship, happiness, self-esteem. They're the same thing.
You had also talked about things like karma and how that's scientifically measurable. Can you just give us a brief understanding of that?
Yeah, you remember the film A Beautiful Mind about John Nash and the Nash equilibrium from game theory and economics? I think some of his work is basically a mathematical proof of karma. That's what he did. That's why he got a Nobel Prize. It's a mathematical proof of karma. At first, if you are a shark and take advantage of people and bully people, and you're a narcissist, you're a vampire, you'll overpower people quickly, and you'll win in the short term. You're kind of a con artist kind of person. You'll win in the short term, but eventually society will catch on to you, punish you, and then you're done. The opposite of that is somebody who's kind of a milquetoast, somebody that's easily taken advantage of. They lose right away. You give your lunch money away to other people, to bullies. But the proper way to navigate this kind of interaction is halfway between the two. have a boundary where every interaction with other people ought to be fair, generally, and equitable, and win-win. So the Nash equilibrium, John Nash, talked about win-win versus win-lose interactions, and only win-win interactions are going to be durable as a connection between people.
What we're talking about here may seem obvious to some people who naturally understand it, but not everyone has these structures and systems running unconsciously. Some people have to work on this. Mm-hmm. What happens if you take that win-lose all the time?
Well, then you are being a dependent person. You're the kind of person that your way of making your way in life is going to be your strategy at trying to win the lotto. You're waiting for magic to happen to save you in life. You're looking for a parent, essentially. And so you've got a lot of growing to do, if you're in that state. Now, at the same time, a lot of people get a lot of gratification feeling like a parent to people. If they're kind of a caretaking type of person, there's a lot of gratification they get out of the mothering role to others. Makes them feel great. But in the end, if everybody's not following the golden rule, then it doesn't work so well. Everybody has to follow the golden rule for it to work.
I gotcha. Okay. And you're talking about spoiling your children. Is that what the mothering instinct? Is that where you're going?
Well, yeah, that when a person does a lot of parentalism toward others, there's a lot of personal gratification they can get out of that. It's a high that they get.
I understand.
But it needs to not be their only way of feeling good about who they are.
Do you come across that scenario a lot in your work in treating patients?
Sure, people that overly caretake others and enable others and are codependent. Oh yeah, sure.
That was an excerpt from an interview with Dr. Paul Dobransky, and this is without going deep into the various archetype work that Dr. Paul has written about in his book, The King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover. In one interview, Dr. Paul was also pointing out how experienced stress can be very damaging to the point where a regression takes place and the personality can revert to a younger psychological age. This bit of information isn't very well known. Think about this for a minute. The improvements gained from years of therapy sessions, personal education, or various critical life-shaping experiences can dissolve when you repeatedly expose your nervous system to stressful thoughts or situations. Protections against this level of stress can occur with a healthy personal boundary. Low self-esteem can also occur from constantly taking lose-lose deals. You're saying yes to every request that's asked of you. The doors to access your personal gold are left wide open. Another way to think about this condition is that the door handles are wrongly placed on the outside where anyone can open them up and then reach in and take what they want. A lot of the time, this is done unconsciously. The results are low self-esteem. You're feeling drained and psychically tired. Psychic fatigue is a mind-body tiredness that past guest Carissa Conti writes about because it's usually the result of energy being transferred to a psychic parasite. Past guest Dr. Joe Slate went into detail about this, and so did Dr. Paul. The indigenous wisdom traditions also point out that on the physical level, drugs and alcohol create holes in the human auric field that allow easy access to etheric parasites and psychic vampires. Not unlike how the mountain pine beetle can detect a weak tree to infest, etheric parasites can spot a weak human energy system. Dr. Joe Slade is the author of Psychic Vampires, Protection from Energy Predators and Parasites. He's a licensed psychologist with a PhD from the University of Alabama and postdoctoral studies in hypnosis and psychosomatic medicine at the University of California. His research into human energy systems has been funded by the U.S. Army and the Parapsychological Foundation of New York. We listen now to an excerpt with an interview with Dr. Joe Slate.
I had a former student. She had just completed her degree in personnel psychology and was being interviewed by a personnel manager for a business position. Well, during the interview, she began to notice this fatigue, this slowing of her mental functions during the interview, and she thought, I'm certainly not at my best in this interview. And then she began to realize that she was the victim of a vampire attack, although the interviewer had no idea, probably, that such an attack was underway. But then she began to realize, I can correct this. I can reverse what is happening here. And she used a technique that she learned in my class called the finger interlock technique. It's sort of a dramatic technique, but it can be done in an instance, and it envelops your body in a protective shield. And so she used that, took command of the interview. The whole situation totally changed, and she was rewarded with an offer for the position. So there are things that we can do. And a part of that finger interlock technique, incidentally, is described in the book. It takes only seconds to implement, and our studies using electrophotography showed that it does erect a shield, a protective shield, around your own personal energy system. I considered that one of the most important findings of our research, and it's available. It's very simple. It's available to anyone who might feel that they're being victimized by energy vampirism.
What an amazing example, and she got the job. But that also...
she did. In fact, she was given an offer beyond that she even expected. I would be glad to run you through this little technique right quickly, Jeff, if you would like. It's so simple and yet so effective. I found in the study of complex phenomena, complexity seeks simplicity. Now, I can't explain why that's the case, but we found very complex psychological and parapsychological phenomena. Always, when you boil it down, they're very simple concepts involved, and the empowering approach to deal with those things is usually quite simple. In the finger interlock technique, you simply join your thumb and middle finger, the tips of each hand, to make two circles. Then you bring the hands together to interlock those circles, so you have the finger interlock. Then you simply mentally use the affirmation, I am protected and fully empowered. And that's all you have to do. Instantly, you assume command of situations, social interactions that otherwise could become more or less vampiristic in their nature.
And one of the hallmarks of that was fatigue, and her mental processes were breaking down a little bit. You point out in the book there's a spectrum of psychic vampirism from maybe this is somewhere in the lower ranges, but in the higher ranges, how severe is it for the victim?
Well, the fact of the matter is, in its higher ranges, you have the energy vampire who develops a dependency on the energy system of another individual. The psychic vampire typically, whether male or female, has a weak energy or undeveloped energy system. And so they have learned to rely on the energy system of other people around them to maintain their energy supply. Now, that's a sad dilemma to find oneself in. So while the psychic vampire may not be aware of that, it nevertheless becomes a powerful force in social interactions. And there's no winner. The victim becomes disempowered by the loss of energy. The vampire becomes disempowered by increased dependency on the energy of another person. And so there are ways of correcting that. And in my writing on this topic and our research studies that backed it up, we found there are ways that the vampire can empower oneself. And there are ways of the victim also using similar techniques to achieve a state of empowerment. So that's what the book is all about. It isn't to condemn the vampire. I mean, what's to be gained by saying, oh, the vampire is an evil person? Or to condemn the victim by being so vulnerable to the vampire. It's just a characteristic that exists in social interactions for almost everyone to some degree. If you think back, Jeff, you may recall a situation in which you just became increasingly fatigued as the interaction wore on. That could be a form of energy transfer, which we could label vampirism. It's certainly an energy type, has nothing to do with the blood type of fictional vampirism. It's just a characteristic that we all experience.
You notice that Dr. Joe Slade has a compassion for the energy parasites because of the energy exchange relativity. The technique he mentions of clasping the hands together is very effective. You can look at it as closing the circuit. However, on a deeper level, you become the target of energy vampires and etheric parasites if your energy system is running low, either from a combination of unhealthy boundaries, a lifetime of lose-lose decisions, and the body being nutritionally deficient. In past shows, Laura Shapira and Dr. Connie Zweig discussed various aspects of Dr. Carl Jung's psychological theory of the human shadow as critical components of ourselves to acknowledge, because if unrecognized, the human shadow begins to grow and evolve on its own, unconsciously, and will usually show up in situations under stress. Dr. Zweig and Laura Shapira also say this is the moment to recognize some of your own buried treasure. Why is understanding the shadow aspect of your personality important for a healthy human boundary and overall human energy system? If this exploration is suppressed, your hidden treasure could remain buried. Dr. Connie Zweig, founder of the Center for Shadow Work and Spiritual Counseling at AIWP. She has a doctorate in psychology, 2 years training at the L.A. Jung Institute, and has been in practice for 20 years. Her books include Meeting the Shadow, The Hidden Power of the Dark Side of Human Nature, and Romancing the Shadow, Illuminating the Dark Side of the Soul. Dr. Zweig has come to be known as the Shadow Expert. We hear an excerpt from past guest Dr. Connie Zweig about the human shadow in the context of relationships. Let's go back to Robert Bly's book, and I'm so glad that you referenced it in that interview with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove. That was really interesting. I didn't know he wrote this book. It really is amazing. And there's an excerpt in there about projection in a marriage. And he writes, it's threatening when the projection starts to rattle. Let's suppose a woman has put a giant mask firmly on her husband's face and feels it as a painful relief. At least she gets it out of her psyche. But what if her husband fails one day to be a negative patriarch? What to do then? Trouble. She might, unconsciously, of course, overdraw her checking account, lose bills, dent the fender, feel victimized, act like a little girl. That may turn him into a tyrant again, or she may go into a feminist meeting to get revved up. Hopefully, someone there will explain that even men's kindness are a subtle part of their oppression. When she gets home, he has the patriarch mask on again. Can you explain?
Carrying, that it's in the women's minds. And it comes from their fathers, particularly. It could come from teachers or priests or other male figures, but mostly from their fathers. And for a while like it's a good relationship. And then one of two things happens. Either he doesn't want all that responsibility anymore and he wants a full partner, or she starts to feel her own power and is no longer satisfied with her subordinate position. And so the projection rattles. Because it rattles because that little fit that they've made is no longer working. And either how he sees her starts to shift or how she sees him starts to shift. And at that point, they need to uncover the old patterns and try to build a new dynamic. Otherwise, the relationship falls apart. If people only see this outwardly, if they only see it as roles, which is how most people see it, that's why we have, more than 50% divorce rate. It's not roles. It's internal. It's internal shadow figures being projected onto the other person. And when the person no longer carries that projection, the whole thing falls apart.
And you're suggesting going back to the original role to resolve what had broken down.
It's often in that situation, because we're in a patriarchal culture, that the woman starts to become empowered, and then the whole thing starts to fall apart. But what I'm suggesting is that that's the time for inner work. When the equilibrium that they've established starts to shake, and you look at each other, each of them looks at the other and says, who the hell am I with? Who are you? You're not the person I married. Then there's an incredible opportunity there for growth and development. It doesn't have to be the end of the marriage at that point.
That was part of an interview with Dr. Connie Zweig, and you can hear that it's very complicated, and the shadow is operating on the unconscious level. And there's a masculine shadow and a feminine shadow. Females can have masculine shadows and men can have feminine shadows. In 1917, Dr. Carl Jung wrote the essay, quote, On the Psychology of the Unconscious, about the personal shadow as the other in us, the negative side of the personality, the sum of all unpleasant qualities we like to hide. It embarrasses us or shames us. Quote, everything with a substance casts a shadow. The ego stands to the shadow as light to shade. Past guest Lori Shapira is a teacher at the C.G. Jung Institute of New York. She's also a filmmaker and author of the book The Cassandra Complex. We talked about the various manifestations of the shadow personality. I was thinking that vulnerability in human beings is something certainly to be exploited by those people who would know about this particular quality of humans, where the projection of shadows could be exploited, and I think it is.
In terms of exploiting the projections of the shadow, people in power could create fear that those bad people out there are going to get you unless you do what I tell you to do. We see that all the time.
There are a number of documentaries that investigate that type of exploitation. A lot of criticism on the war on terror and these types of things.
Homeland security. Surveilling our phone calls and emails could be seen in that light. I mean, it's a very slippery slope. It's a very tricky proposition.
And within all of this, the government and the agenda is constantly caught in lies and deception, and it's constantly being exposed, which is another major shadow aspect on their part.
Absolutely, absolutely. One thing that I wanted to make a point of is that there are two kinds of shadow. There is personal shadow, and there is collective, more archetypal kind of shadow. Personal shadow derives from your family of origin, from your childhood, maybe parts of you that your mother and father don't like and would like for you to suppress and repress, which then drives those parts of you into the shadow, so that it's very hard for you to live out your wholeness, live out your true self. Now, in terms of the collective shadow, groups have a shadow. Nations have a shadow. Religious groups have a shadow. Ethnic groups have a shadow. Civilizations have a shadow. One thing that I have personally found to be very interesting, and it is sort of the subject of the last film that I made, is the shadow of Western civilization. One way to look at the shadow of a group is you juxtapose their ideals, their ego ideals, over and against the shadow of those ideals. Let's say we look at American ideals. I mean, we would like to see ourselves as the guardians of democracy in the world. So what's the shadow of that? Well, we've become power mongers. Our concept of ourselves is very inflated.
Would terrorists be the shadow aspect of the guardians of democracy?
That would be the projection. The projection of the shadow of the guardians of democracy, because we're the good guys. We wear the white hats. So the terrorists are the bad guys. But the qualities of the terrorists, if we look at ourselves, we see that we are terrorists. Here we've got two different concepts put together. We've got the shadow of our being the guardians of democracy, but we also are projecting it. But we know that shadow manifests not only in projection, but it also manifests in actions that we say we're not doing. And, which goes to your idea of the lies and deceptions. Are they lies and deceptions when the government is caught with their pants down? Are they lying, or are they really unconscious?
We've had on past guests talking about lies, and we've had on Dr. Brad Blanton, who wrote a book called Radical Honesty, and he talked about the most pernicious lie was withholding truth. We find through investigative journalism that the government often is found withholding truth. That's a very interesting shadow aspect.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind with that is like Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction. Was that a conscious lie originally, which got disseminated? I mean, where does a lie leave off and a not knowing come in? Mm-hmm. Who knew, who didn't know?
So these are very strong examples of the archetype shadow, the collective shadow, which manifests within civilizations, countries, and religions, as you pointed out, and groups and institutions. What other archetype examples do you have?
Well, to stay with the shadow of America, we also like to see ourselves as the compassionate upholders of human rights. So what's the shadow of that? A holier-than-thou attitude. Another manifestation of the shadow in our world would be the pedophile priests in the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, which has given rise to these horrific, abuses of children. It makes sense in a horrible kind of a way, because to need to be a spiritual paragon of virtue, it doesn't leave any room for reality, for the body, for the needs of the body. Taking a vow of chastity and acting out in such a horrific and dark way. An interesting juxtaposition. I mean, most religions fall prey to some kind of a shadow problem. Evangelical ministers who have either been found to be doing financial mischief or having affairs with this and that. Political figures who create their own sort of destruction. It's rampant in our culture, with a lot of positive projections then falling prey. I mean, one of the things one can say about shadow is what shines the brightest creates the darkest shadow. Another ideal that we hold is personal individual freedom. That's something that America and Western civilization has really developed, is individual freedom. Well, there's a lot of shadow to that. I mean, then what about the group? It seems that Eastern civilization has developed along the line of group consciousness more than we have. So what's the shadow of developing the notion of personal and individual freedom? Greed, egotism, narcissism. I mean, narcissism is the disease of our culture.
That was Lori Shapira, teacher at the C.G. Jung Institute of New York. Some people don't want to talk about evil or even think about evil. Remember Mark Passio's interview about the New Age philosophy of never getting angry. Mark says you need anger for the transmutation process. The human shadow will target those who ignore its ancient psycho-spiritual disease of the soul. Author Paul Levy calls it Wetiko. It's another name for the same affliction of the shadow. Paul's book, Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil, claims by realizing that we're all capable of terrible evil unwittingly or not is a beginning to dissolve its strength. Paul had a life-changing spiritual awakening and began to recognize the dreamlike nature of reality. Let's go now to some of that interview. How would you suggest to someone listening right now ways in which they could recognize the Wetiko influence or manifestation in their life?
Well, I mean, there are three ways. There are probably a lot more than three, but there are three that I kind of talk about, and they're all the same in a way. They're all aspects of the same deeper, sort of energy. And because I think about in my life what was happening in my family. So here my father, to give an example, was a very sick man and was playing out this, he was acting out his unconscious and just playing out his stuff and just acting that without any consciousness. And I was in the role of the one who was not only the recipient of it, but had some form of awareness and was trying to point at it or shed light on it. And what I couldn't believe was how the entire family system, not only my mother, but the relatives, but then once mental health psychiatrists came in, they played this role too, that the whole field, the whole family system actually configured to protect the abuser. And